Why are there two Spider-Men beating the crap out of each other? Is something that I asked myself last month when I first installed Marvel Rivals. This is also a phenomenon that happens in several online multiplayer games. The real answer to this question is that the developers didn't want to lock people out of their favorite character and drive away a potential stream of future microtransactions. However, some developers have decided to try to prescribe lore explanations for these answers. And so I figured I would research this for several games and see which games have a lore explanation and which ones don't. And before somebody with the name Buzzkill McGooberwaffle can come in and say something like, "Why do you have to think about this so much? Just enjoy the game." No. A world in which I cannot ask these questions about the lore for the video games I play is a world that I do not want to live in. Plus, I just think it's kind of fun to research the lore for video games, and I think some of the answers that they give are
sometimes maybe good, sometimes maybe shit.
So without further ado, let's just jump into it. The first group of games are ones that have a specific lore reason for why there are duplicate characters sharing a space with each other, and this reason is central to the plot of those games. So first, let's start with Marvel Rivals, since that's probably why you clicked on this video. I knew from the get-go that this game was going to have a canonical explanation for why heroes are fighting alternate versions of themselves, because most characters have a line shit-talking themselves when they get in an altercation with their counterpart.
The next version of me I meet is nicer.
I kind of assumed that this would be an adaptation of Marvel's Secret Wars, where the universes collide and the heroes have to kind of duke it out first and ask questions later. But it's more of like a we have Secret Wars at home kind of deal. You see, there are two different versions of Doctor Doom in Marvel Rivals. One from the year 2099 and one from the year 2024, and they were both messing around with the timelines. They bonked their timelines together, and they both refused to cede to the other, and this started what is called the time stream entanglement. I know somewhere across the multiverse, Will Smith just let out a shiver. Instead of taking different universes and mashing them together, this took different chronoverses or timelines and mashed those together. The results of this time stream
entanglement
were pretty varied across the board, but basically it all boils down to separate factions of heroes and villains are trying to restore order, conquer the chaos, or preserve their people in their own way. A lot of the time, this involves a material called chronovium, which is believed to be the key to either fixing or conquering the timelines. For instance, the surge in chronovium caused the tree Yggdrasil to grow and expand and overtake Asgard and what is now known as Yggsgard. As is typical whenever he is needed most, Odin just went into a deep slumber, and therefore Loki and Hela were able to overpower Thor, take over Yggsgard, and give Thor the BTFO by sending him to another dimension. Another big player in this story is Null, the eldritch god of darkness and the god of the symbiotes. He is taking advantage of the chaos and infecting the gods and the heroes alike with his influence. A couple examples of this are the Master Weaver, who is basically the god of all spider people, and Bast, who is the goddess to the Wakandan people, who are now a galactic empire. Other factions of heroes and villains are the New York Avengers, who were merged with a timeline in which the city was under siege by Dracula, the Guardians of the Galaxy, who were on Clintar trying to figure out how to stop Null, the 2099 Avengers, who were trying to stop 2099 Doom, and Doctor Strange, who is trapped in the mirror dimension after trying to stop the time stream entanglement and can only come out for about 20 minutes at a time so he can go 2-8 for his team because he can't aim and doesn't know how to use his shield properly. So basically, why there are two Spider-Men fighting each other all boils down to a mishmash of timelines, several different teams with different methods and motives to try to fix or break things, and a splash of suspension of belief. With the payload objectives, it's pretty obvious which team is the good team or the bad team based on what the payload is supposed to represent. But I think aside from that, you're just supposed to interpret yourself as the good or the true version of that character fighting for their specified lore reasons, and the player on the other team is a more sinister, try-hard version of you from an inferior timeline. Another interesting tidbit is that the Season 0 lore Peter Parker talks about a different version of him wearing a low-budget costume, which is a costume for him in the game in Marvel Rivals that you can buy, which might imply that different outfits are canonically different timelines. Overall, I think this is a fine enough explanation for it all. It at least tries to explain things, but takes enough gameplay liberties to not be stuck to the lore, and it doesn't really inhibit the gameplay just to adhere to that lore, you know? Valorant is similar to Marvel Rivals in the sense that the reason these characters are fighting alternate universe versions of themselves is key and central to the lore for this game. This revolves around a central setting known as the Mirrorverse. A semi-recent event caused Earth's timeline to split, which created Alpha Earth and Omega Earth. These two Earths started to diverge from each other in small but significant ways. Omega Earth started to have a few crises that resulted in them using a lot of radianite, which is a precious energy source. Running out of energy and running out of options, Omega Earth got desperate, and as a result, their technology advanced and they discovered the existence of Alpha Earth. At first, the two Earths had a tentative understanding of each other, but as time went on, Omega Earth's situation became more and more dire, and to stop their planet from dying, they sent some of their best and brightest over to Alpha Earth to plant a spike in some of their radianite reserves, hoping to extract it for themselves. Alpha Earth sent their best and brightest to defend the radianite, which just so happened to be the exact same people, to stop them. And therein lies the central conflict of Valorant. Each map has a canon Alpha team and a canon Omega team based on the lore for those maps. Most of the time, Omega is trying to plant the spikes and Alpha is trying to defuse them, but a few of the maps have the roles reversed. Honestly, I'm really impressed with the dedication of Riot Games to intertwine the gameplay and the lore to this degree. They really didn't have to come up with an explanation for why Hero Shooter Counter-Strike has duplicates of characters, but they took the time to do it anyway. I think being a little hand-wavy and saying you didn't want to have gameplay and lore interfere with each other is a good enough excuse to take liberties, but they didn't really do that. They did a good job of it all, and even though I myself am not really a Valorant player, just the lore itself got me interested in trying it out. I sucked at it. This next group of games are those that have a lore explanation for why there are duplicate characters around, but it's not really a key part to the lore. I'm starting to think it's almost a requirement for me to shoehorn Dead by Daylight into these videos, because for the third comparing video games on this criteria video, it makes its appearance. Dead by Daylight is a bit interesting because the developers have flip-flopped on why you can see multiples of the same character in a round. To catch up to speed, a quick summary of DBD's lore is that an elder god, known as the Entity, needs to feast on strong human emotions in order to survive. Apparently, the best way of doing this is to abduct people from across the universes so it can put 4 survivors in a difficult but not unwinnable game of cat and mouse against a ruthless killer. That way, the Entity can feed off of the hope, fear, and despair of the survivors and the bloodlust and anger of the killers. Originally, the developers of Dead by Daylight said that having 4 of the same survivor in the lobby was merely a gameplay decision and had no impact on the lore.
What goes through Claudette's mind when she sees 3 other Claudettes?
So, like, I don't think this is a lore thing. Like, this is just the game mechanic thing.
Yeah.
You can play. We wanted for you to be able to play the character you want, without being limited.
We knew.
And the lore entries reflected that. There is a non-playable character known as the Observer who can look into the people's memories, and he serves as the player's window into the lives of the survivors and killers in the game. One of his lore entries talks about him seeing into the life of a survivor named Claudette Morel, but it's a different Claudette Morel, not the one that he knows, and he's a bit surprised by that fact. As someone who literally spends his entire time observing the DBD roster, you would think that he wouldn't be surprised at the notion that he's seeing a second Claudette hit the lobby, unless a duplicate survivor was not typically something that's canon to Dead by Daylight. However, this has seemingly been retconned, as in more recent lore entries, the Observer has found dead, discarded bodies of some of the survivors. Also, the developers have more recently explicitly said that survivors can see duplicates of themselves in the lobby as a product of multiverse shenanigans. Of the 3 games we've covered so far, I'd say Dead by Daylight is the weakest, as it not only is pretty inconsequential to the plot, but it's also something that they've just flip-flopped on. Furthermore, this, in my opinion, kind of robs the survivors of their individuality and makes it less important to the players as to whether or not these characters are going to eventually make it out of this nightmare cat and mouse scenario, knowing that there are millions of versions of them. A mirror match is a fighting game term that is when 2 of the same character are fighting each other, whether it's in Tekken or Street Fighter, or in this case, Mortal Kombat 1. And Mortal Kombat 1 goes out of its way to explain how the mirror matches are occurring in the lore. When 2 characters clash at the start of a match in MK1, they shit talk each other, in one way or another.
I am the original Scorpion.
If it's the exact same character, that usually entails a bit of exposition as to how this is occurring. Sometimes it's timeline shenanigans, others Kung Lao has cloned them, but for Ghostface, whoever doesn't get hit with a fatality is Stu Mocker and the other is Billy Loomis, since whichever one gets fatality'd is Billy Loomis's face. But I think the funniest explanation is that sometimes it's just Johnny Cage who's showing off his acting skills by pretending to be the same character.
Amazing. You look just like me, Johnny. Gotta love those Hollywood makeup wizards.
That man is so getting canceled for playing an Asian dude. Where most fighting games don't try to explain their mirror matches, Mortal Kombat makes sure to give you a cliche or stupidly funny reason, and I applaud them for that. Fortnite lore is a little bit confusing, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on it, but it is another game where it may or may not be canon to see a mirror version of yourself in the game. Essentially, you're not actually playing as the character that you have equipped in Fortnite, but rather you're playing as a snapshot or a copy of them that was left behind when that character won their canon victory royale and escaped the island. So I think what that means, canonically speaking, is that Mariah Carey has eliminated an entire island's worth of competitors to make it out of there alive. There's no word on whether or not there can be multiple snapshots of a character on the island at the same time, so this is a little bit dubious as far as I know. So if you see two Michael Myerses doing the gritty together, I think that's the lore explanation for it. And now let's talk about video games that do not have an explanation as to why you're fighting your evil doppelganger from hell, or they have an explanation that you're not actually doing that. Let's go to Overwatch 2. You see, none of Overwatch's gameplay is actually happening in that universe. The PvP gameplay is not canon to the lore of Overwatch, but rather the PvE gameplay is. Which is kind of funny, seeing how Overwatch became Overwatch 2 in order to create more PvE lore content, only for them to just not do that. But as for the PvP, there isn't anything concrete as to what that is. It's either a what-if scenario or a simulation that the Overwatch heroes take part in so that they can hone their skills and see what works and what doesn't work for the threats that they are trying to protect the world against in their actual Overwatch lore. So why are two Wintons zapping each other?
It's a made-up tale. It's a total fabrication. It never happened.
Apex Legends does like a hybrid approach where the gameplay is canon, but the characters who are in there are not. You see, in Apex Legends, you play as one of several different legends who are competing in the Apex games, which is basically a spectacle sport Hunger Games type thing. The answer for why your character can die one round and be around for the next is that the legends are so popular with the viewers that they have access to special medical equipment that they can essentially revive themselves from the dead. And you might be thinking, why is that necessary when there are like a billion different versions of Mirage or Gibraltar just running around? Because there isn't. The lore explanation for why there are duplicate legends on the battlefield is that there is not. Most of the competitors in the Apex games are basically nobodies. They're just mercenaries and randoms trying to make a name for themselves. Respawn Entertainment did not want to take away from the individuality of the legends by saying there were a billion clones or multiverse variants or whatever, and they didn't have the ability to launch with 60 characters to make it lore accurate, so basically the canon Apex games are probably much less exciting than what you see in the video game. I can respect this take on it. Despite how much of a lore snob I may seem, I think there's some grace in saying, hey, we want to preserve our lore, and as such, we're willing to take some liberties with the gameplay and let there be some disconnect between the two. I think that's totally fine. There are several other games in which duplicate characters are not canon. League of Legends is another game in which none of the gameplay is actually canon after a retcon back in the day. Team Fortress 2 does not give an explanation at all. That's a Giga Chad move and I respect it, and I believe the same goes for Smite. What I'm trying to get at with this isn't that games need to have a lore explanation for every bit of gameplay they have. Like I said for Apex, I respect the hell out of them for having visions for their lore and their gameplay and not letting them interfere with each other. I also respect Valorant for doing a really good job at tying everything together so neatly. At the end of the day, the lore for multiplayer games is merely the seasoning on a meal. The best seasoning in the world isn't going to save a terrible meal, much like how a pinch of cheap table salt isn't going to ruin a really good steak. It's just for me and my YouTube channel, I really like seeing what these companies put into their seasonings. So there you have it. These are the in-game lore reasons, or lack thereof, for why you can see multiple versions of your character in the video game. Are there any games that I missed that you wish I had covered? Are there any games that you feel execute this super well or super poorly? I'd love to hear it. With all that being said, my name is not freaking Nick. I hope that the last 15 or so minutes have been educational and or entertaining. And if I see you again, great. If not, I hope you have a great life.